Welcome to another edition of More, talking with folks in the community about issues related to our struggles and challenges and issues that we're facing. I've invited Brea Worthington, who is a board member of More. She also has worked in the child welfare system and considers herself a social worker by profession. I got to know her doing her work at Promise Ship or Nebraska Families Collaborator, where she was a family permanency specialist. I recall her conversation at one of our table talks that we did where she had described the inability of white workers to understand African American family role and some of the key people within the family. Bree is a parent and an advocate for African American communities, children, and families, and she's also the vice chair of the Moore Board of Directors. We invited her to talk about issues affecting children and family in our community, and particularly in systems. And we wanted her to share some of her insight and help us to understand the importance of what we need to be about as a community. So, Bree, welcome to our program. And first, I'd like to start off by can you share with the listening audience a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I think you covered most of it, except for my new venture of starting a nonprofit. Sorry, hold on, it's recording my way. A nonprofit called Life Changes Resource Center that is geared towards helping to empower families and individuals of color.
Okay.
That's pretty much it. I am still an advocate. I am dead center in North Omaha. I love the North Omaha community. I advocate and I help wherever I can.
Right. One of the things that we'll say as part of our conversation about conversation on race and anti-racism challenges in our community. Again, that is the focus of what we're about. During the last few months, there's many things have changed because of your role with more being on the board. From your perspective, what do you see as an important part of helping the organization to thrive?
I think one of the larger things that has to be understood is the difference between implicit bias and racism. I work very hard when we go to meetings or we're speaking to people because they always seems like we get a lot of conversation about people saying, "Well, I've read a book or I went to a workshop." But racism is sometimes embedded in the subtle behaviors that people are not aware of or they're not comfortable even addressing because it's not that big of a deal in their perspective. So I really, one of the biggest focus for me is making sure people really understand that sometimes when you think you're just being dismissive, it's more so racist.
Uh, Many of us are aware that you're Catholic, and I know you've shared at some point you were a creative Catholic. What is it like being both an African American and a Catholic?
Um, Up until I was an adult, any different. I went to private school. Everybody in the school looked like me. They had a mom, they had a dad. We had the nun system of kids. I don't think she ever took her hobbit or whatever they thing is. I think she slept in that, but that was just sidetracked. But in actuality, it wasn't until I became an adult um, that people started to look at me strange. Growing up as a cradle Catholic, my church, yes, is the primarily African American. Well, at that time, it was the only Black African American church in Catholic Church in Nebraska. They made sure that we understood that our culture, but we also networked with different African American parishes across the country, and there is a large amount down south.
Mhm. Uh, we want to focus on issues dealing with African Americans and the child welfare system. What are the most important things or pressing things that you see confronting us as a community and as a society?
Ignorance, and I'm going to say ignorance on both sides. I think that um, the people that have been charged with the job of helping the African American community are just as ignorant as the people within the African American community.
Okay.
I struggle every day with trying to explain that the family dynamics in African American communities are still very much tribal, no matter how much we discuss about slavery and how long they've been here. Um, it frustrates me to no end when I look at the Native American accommodations and the African American families don't get those same ones because it's kind of built on the same system. But then I also look at it from ignorance. And when I say ignorance, there's no better way to describe it. People believe because they read a book, they've mastered a course, or they've mastered what a intervention model is, that they know all they need to know about the community. But if you've never walked in the African American community, you never understood the hierarchy of the African American community, developing policies, doing laws, doing interventions for these families is pointless, because we're basically relational. So if you can't relate to us or you don't understand us, there is no way possible that you can help us. But then on our end, on our community, I think African Americans have gotten so comfortable with everybody fighting their battle that we have not put ourselves in a position to where we know and understand our rights. We count on everybody else to come and aid us in distress. So at an alarming rate, ignorance on both sides is destroying the African American family at a very, very fast rate.
hmm One of the things I'd like to share is that back in the day, UNO used to offer African American families class. I used to teach it. And I don't know what they're doing now, but I suspect there are not enough significant organizations or people who work with families who have some challenges, and particularly those families who don't have like extended families or a lot of close kinship or relatives or even great neighbors. They face some of these consequences. So it's something we need to look at. One of the things I saw on articles in the Lincoln Journal Star, I think it was March the 31st, where Melanie Williams Smotherman challenged some comments by Jim Blue. He was Cedars. He's the executive director of Cedars Home for Children in Lincoln. And basically, what Melanie argued is that there are not enough. Jim said there's not enough homes for specific children in the foster care system or in child welfare system. Melody shot back a piece saying part of the problem is that the system is broken and we got children who shouldn't be in the system. And I remember back in the day at Promise Ship or Nebraska Families Collaborative, there were people who were sharing that we yanked kids out too quick and we didn't have the infrastructure to deal with making families whole or making the community whole. So my question is, give me an overview of Melanie's argument that most children are there in the system because of poverty, but not abuse, meaning in systems.
I don't even think it's because of poverty. I believe that it's more so because of subtle racism. Um, Systemic trauma within the Black community, until we address it, I don't care if it's nationally, state, local, we're going to always have this problem. People don't realize how fearful it is to have what they call the people come into your house and tell you you're doing something wrong as a parent. And everybody knows that when you're afraid, fight or flight are the two things you do. So either you're going to be combative or you're going to shut down. And because they just assume everybody is combative, they don't even think to look at if there's been generational trauma within the system. And it doesn't matter if it was the child welfare system, it could have been the police system, it could have been any system. So approaching an African American family and not really understanding how systemic trauma affects child welfare really, it bothers me because everything is very intricate. I mean, they do have all these models and it's great, but I mean, when they approach a African American family, it's more like it's probably crisis based model. Everything is at crisis, and it's not necessarily that. You have to have people that understand that it takes time to be able to observe and understand what's going on within a family. And for African American families, a lot of times they shut down and they're resistant because they have evidence of years of when we've complied or we've looked like we're going to engage, our children have been killed. People have left our home and never came back again. Or when they came back, they weren't the same person they were when they left before. Mentally, they've said that we're wrong. We've been persecuted for the way we live. A lot of people don't understand that a 20-year-old white man versus a 20-year-old Black man have to have a different speech and a different walk when they walk out the door if they want to get back home the same day. And I feel like that is what's killing our child welfare system, is because everyone just assumes, well, if we just give them a voice and choice, you got to understand that up under all that resistance or up under all that language. Um, there's a story and there's a reason why. And I know that there's time. And that's one of the biggest things that a lot of child welfare workers or administrators will say is you don't have time to really assess. But that's the problem. That's why child welfare doesn't work, because you need to have people that are not in a hurry to observe. Because yeah, it may be a broken problem there, but there's usually some type of intricate network in most, and I'm gonna say most, I'm pretty confident most families that steps in and they help. They are those what they call informal supports, but it's not going to look like what the traditional, I'm gonna say, colonized way the child welfare system thinks it should. So that's where I'm at. It's killing us.
Well, the other thing that related to that is that there's a lack of advocacy from public policy officials as well as some do-gooders to engage the families on all these integral details or situations that we need to be addressing. About a year ago, let's say a little bit over a year ago, you and I attended a community meeting where there were fathers and some parents who were talking about the local police department were using child welfare issues as a means of leverage to deal with their cases, kind of like a form of blackmailing or so. What was that all about from an African American perspective? And again, you saw it from a different light than maybe some participants or other folks by virtue of your skill sets and what your knowledge of many of the circumstances affecting our community. What do you think of that meeting?
Ignorance. I think that word keeps coming around, but it's because we seem to want to be reactive and not proactive. No, it is not against the law for a parent to be a criminal and a parent. But the reality is, depending on what you're engaging in as a parent, you have to kind of know at some point you're going to have to run into the police. So we're allowing these police officers to violate us because we don't make plan B. We don't try to anticipate what can happen. I mean, we can go back to something as simple, for an example, as life insurance. We have people walking around in $200 pair of shoes, but they don't find it important to have life insurance. How many chicken dinners do you have a month because somebody didn't have life insurance, which life insurance can be $10 a month. So when we look at it, sometimes I think as a culture, yes, we are targeted, but we're an easy target because we always just wait for someone else to fix it. At some point, we have to step up and start fixing things ourselves.
Let's clear about that. One of the things that I'm really concerned about, and I find it somewhat sad, is as I looked at that case and I remember the conversation that we had, there was a need for follow-up. I wish there was people who could actually follow up with some of the cases and deal with that. And again, that's where you get the Heartland Family Services in some of that. But I didn't see that happening.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm not gonna blame that on anybody. Just the dynamics of that case. Was it really a need for follow-up, or was it a need for a come to Jesus meeting? Somebody should have had a come to Jesus meeting with that father. I mean, I don't know how many times your house can be raided before you realize that you might be on the radar. And if you're the legal custodian of your kids, you might want to have another plan. Right. I mean, these guys are savvy enough. They can sit and they can do math so well. They can figure out how to calculate guns, but you can't figure out that the police is looking at you while you're selling them. I think when we did that actual interview, I rubbed him the wrong way. I think the words I use is you don't poop where you eat. And he didn't appreciate that. But that's the reality. But I think that's also something that's been conditioned in us in society as a whole, is that we have turned from being honest to being mean. No one wants to tell another person the truth. And the thing is, as a mother, if you have to tell your son, okay, if this is if you choose the lifestyle of being a career criminal, and people are like, I'm not a career criminal, I'm just, if you've been involved in 6 rapes, you're a career criminal. That is not something that just happens. That's not a driving while black thing. Like, so you need to be planning accordingly. Do I have children? How do I have this work? If you give them any inkling when you know you're not doing right, you can't blame anybody but yourself. You should already have a plan for when they come. Not if they come, but for when they come.
Right. Good. So You've been working on some specific projects and service for family. What do you see yourself doing in the next few years in terms of helping the African American family?
I really, really, really want to focus on um, African American families understanding their rights as parents, helping the dads become more active, um, being able to address some of the trauma that you experience just naturally growing up being African American, because I think it'll help as a whole as being a parent. Because a lot of times, some of the things that we do as adults, our children see it as being mean, but we're protecting them because of some experience. So, some of the projects that I've been working on is one is called Mommy Daughter Day. I'm going to do a Father Sunday. It doesn't sound as cute as Mommy Daughter Day, but um, where we create a safe space once COVID breaks down, where the kids come in after the parents have had a series of parenting classes. They've they've actually mastered some of the parent coaching, and they kind of understand that yes, we were raised a certain way, but that does not mean it was right. And they have to sign a waiver. That's the funny part, because this is where that village comes in. We sit down, we do a craft, or we do an activity, but it's an open, safe space for the kids to ask any question, to bring up anything. The catch to it is not only is it an open, safe place, the parent, your parent is the only parent that gets to weigh in. All the parents of the village gets to weigh in. That way you can create some type of dialogue. Because sometimes us as parents, we can be overboard too. So from a different perspective, if your village is there to weigh in and you're like, well, hey, I'm not really sure. Should I be doing this or shouldn't I be do this? If you can, sometimes that can help sway. Because one of the biggest things that we have with child welfare is we have a lot of mental illness. We have a lot of parents that are angry. So they just snap. And it's because they don't know. And they just want to protect their children from whatever they endured in the past.
Uh,
So
we
that
have not we, we have not really talked about the police, law enforcement, courts, and African Americans. Would you care to share your ideas on how they're treating our families, those respective institutions?
disrespectful. But those institutions were not made to rehabilitate or to protect us. One of my biggest things is, and I got this from my Catholic church. I think it was Miss Goodwin. When years and years ago, we used to always complain we wanted a black priest, we wanted a black priest, we wanted a black priest, because we didn't have one. How come the black church in Nebraska doesn't have a black priest? And one of the priests, I think the archdiocese came in and said, "Well, did you bring one?" And I thought about it, like, did we bring? You can't expect to change a system and expect the system to change for you if there's nobody in that system that's making decisions that look like it, period. So yes, they are disrespectful, and it's very, very sad. But until you have more police officers, more lawyers, more judges, more politicians sitting there that have personally experienced that are passing these laws, we're going to always be disrespected and dismissed about our concerns, because we only talk when something bad happens. But you have to be in the trenches every day, and it's a very uncomfortable feeling sometimes.
As a person who's taught in the UNO School of Social Work, I was surprised at the department's level of racism and how they treat African American families. The lack of courses dealing with Native Americans and other people of color, particularly the faculty. They've never really had a decent level of diversity in the faculty. And moreover, if you look at the criminal justice department at UNO, it's even more atrocious in the sense of very few people of color working there, or professors, so on. Matter of fact, the criminal justice department has a course on gangs, been around for gang members and things like that, meaning they're studying them and tracking them and all that, but they don't have one on white supremacy, dealing with some of the white nationalism that's going on in our communities, in our country, and so on. And they really don't deal with challenging the criminal justice system. How can we reverse the brainwashing education that is occurring in many of our post secondary institutions? Or can we?
We have to saturate those institutions. I think last summer I brought up an idea. Our best and our brightest are actively recruited by these institutions you're discussing. If our best and our brightest stopped taking the scholarships, stopped taking the fame, and was willing to take a pay cut just to go to a HBCU, that'll change the systems quickly because they're not making any money off of it. They have no motivation to change their structure or their style because we're still, hey, I can get to an NCAA school. Why would I go to this HBCU? Hey, I can get this $1 million contract. Why would I go to the Black Negro League? I mean, so when you look at it from that standpoint, we kind of have to take some accountability of our own. Do we need to start revisiting how we measure success in our community, and we need to learn how to support our own and teach our own, because you can't expect somebody that created a table that was not meant for you to make accommodations for you. That's the reality. We can look at it just even in Nebraska. We look at just how in the last 20 years the Hispanic population has reformed the South Omaha area, and we're still struggling to do just the basic minimums in North Omaha. It's very concerning, but I think we've gotten to that, what they call the welfare mentality. Somebody else will do it. I don't want my son to be the one that's the sacrificial lamb. I don't want my son to go into that. I had a bad experience with that. And that's why we are so blatantly disrespected and dismissed, because if you don't have to see my face every day when we're making decisions, why would you care how I feel if I just say something when something bad happens? It's not
Wow.
gonna bother you.
Wow. I don't want to, even though I'm critical of UNO, I'm not want to let Creighton off the hook. I know other post-secondary institutions with their apartheid and segregated departments. Do you see others joining us in the struggles from those other respective institutions, from other colleges or universities in this community?
Not here. Absolutely not here. Um, the reality is, and I know this is probably bad for me to say this, especially since I'm starting off life changes, but we live in a Republican state where if it's not broke, don't fix it. And if it's not affecting my household, then it's not my problem. So they feel like they give out so many scholarships a year to poor, destitute children, or they got about 10 extra African American children that did a little better on the test than they did before. So they feel like they fixed the problem. The problem is us as parents have to be the ones that demand those changes, and we're not. We just so focus on our children succeeding that we don't realize that it has to be a strategic success that's going to be able to change these systems.
Wow. I, one of the things is if you had your wish, and I oftentimes use that metaphor, how can we get more grass top community folks involved in changing the society's existing paradigms and the conditions? How do we get more involvement from our community?
Um, Engaging. I mean, you have to be able to come off that pedestal, come past that 30th Street um marker or 72nd and be able to engage. They will. The people want to be a part of. A lot of them are afraid because they've been beaten down by some of these structures that they're not smart enough and they're not good enough. Um, One thing about our community is we think the more money you make or the more letters you have behind your name, the more successful you are, the smarter you are. One thing that I've learned over the last 12 years is I've learned a lot from people that have never been to college, that have never maybe even finished junior high. They've given me more insight than some of the books that I've read. I think that we have to hold the Black professionals more accountable about, let's mentoring and raising our own, and let's engage them. Even if it means we're going to feel uncomfortable sitting at a table with our colleagues 2 or 3 times, fine. If that means bringing somebody from the community that may actually can contribute something, bring them. And I think that's what we all just seem to be about appearance.
Mhm. When I heard previously you challenged the leadership in our community, particularly the bougies and so on, for sitting on their hands and so on. What can they do to improve the lots for the masses?
Not be afraid to take a pay cut. The reality is The people that are in the trenches, that really are in the trenches, that are not on TV every day, are not the ones that are driving the Benzes, that are not the ones that have the $350 million houses. Those are the people that you may see in the Honda Accord. Those are the people that you may see their kids go to public school and they may not have on the best shoes. Um, the a lot of the faces that you see on TV, or what I would like to say, our politicians in Nebraska want us to serve the Black people. They don't even make up our community. They don't make up our community. Half of our community don't even know who they are. If we want to change that, we have to also learn that you can't sell your soul for a dollar. And just because you can get six figures, it's six figures worth your pride, your integrity, and what you really set out to do.
You know, one of the things is I watch politicians, people run for office, and I hear them saying this and that. It's somewhat painful to watch because they've never busted a public policy grape. How many letters have they written in a year? How many events have they challenged the power to be, or as they say, speak truth to power? Many of them don't have any track record. So how do you think you're going to change overnight and change the system if you haven't put your work in the trenches? So that's another challenge that we face in our community. We got some of the second and third string quarterbacks trying to run and play in the Super Bowl, and life is a Super Bowl for many of us as African Americans, and particularly our lives depend upon how well people do out in their larger arena. I was going to ask you, I suspect you catch hell for being an outspoken advocate for African American community. What is the extent of that in your profession? Do you actually catch hell, as they say, as Malcolm says, from sun up to sundown, from challenging the structure, challenging the octopus sometime? What is that like for you?
I mean, I've caught hell my whole life. I have. After religious ed, I can guarantee you most of the time I was doomed for a spanking, not a beating, a spanking. I don't know how many times they pulled my ear. Come on, girl, let's call your mom in the room. So this has just been me. I will say I don't see it as much as causing hell anymore or catching hell, because people know who I am. When you're transparent and that's who you are day in and day out, either they're going to fall in line with you or they're not. And I am an acquired taste, so I don't really call it catching hell. I do kind of put people on notice when I'm going to be a little bit more surly than normal, is the word I'm going to use for it. Because some people are not aware, but I've gotten to the point where it's me, and I'm content with being uncomfortable. I think I was watching a TED Talk where one of the women said that in order to grow in your career and to grow as a person, you have to learn how to be okay being uncomfortable. Because if you surround yourself with people, things, and places that you're comfortable in, you'll never grow. I spent a lot of time in promiseship in the discipline office, but that's how I learned how to do child welfare. So it was a blessing and a curse, because before I would implement something child welfare wise, I would research it. So then when they ask me, well, why did you do that? I can go back and read their policy that was made for that situation. So maybe in the beginning it was more of a catch and hell, solely because I think my generation, believe it or not, I think I'm like a year off from not being a millennial. So I'm a millennial where everything is just handed to me. And I had to go back and learn to read and research and be able to support what things are going on. And once I did that, it's not so much of catching hell, because it kind of quiet the naysayers if you can support your rambunctiousness, is what I'll call it.
You know, as you mentioned that, one of the things I like to share with people at Catholic chairs, I worked for 25 years. I was put on probation 3 times for social justice issues. At the end of the day, it didn't affect my salary, but there was their way of putting you in check when you challenge the system and use their own rules. I remember Dolores Goodlet one time made a statement on one of the radio programs. She says, "I can stand on the Archbishop's feet and slap him with the word." It was interesting I should use that metaphor. But at the end of the day, when you know what the rules are and you know what your laws are and you know your community, you get to speak truth to power. Same thing with Promiseship or Nebraska Family Collaborative. it was amazing sometimes when I asked the basic information of how many people of color work there. One of the questions came from HR. Why do you want to know that for? Well, come on now. Either you got the numbers or you don't. You don't need to ask me what I want it for. If I'm working here as a member of this institution or organization, and particularly in a senior position, should I have the numbers of what's going on? And you got all these people who are hiding stuff, and that's when our community looks like it does, because obviously we're not getting the jobs, we're not getting the kind of opportunities that other folks get because they're friends of the system. So yeah, if you're doing your work as Malcolm talks about, we're going to catch hell in the twilight zone, and that's part of life, and so on.
Yeah, because I'll get up in the morning, be like, okay, this is going to be one of those weeks. I'm going to stir the pot a little bit and see how many fires I start, and I'll go from there. And then I'll sit back and watch them and see how they go. But I don't really see it one way or the other. I think that my community has started to respect me for it. I get a lot of questions and calls, and that's what I want. I want to be a social worker that is approachable. I want to be a social worker that you can trust with a dilemma. I would love for our community to go back to that village, because that's part of the reason why the child welfare system has been able to attack us and win, is because we're all so afraid to ask for help or to seek clarification of what's being asked of us, that they find our weaknesses and then they capitalize on them and they run you crazy. A
Right.
lot of, and seriously, that's what happens. And so I love being the lady that works for the people now. And yes, I've been doing this for 12 years. 7 of it, I did ongoing case management and removed children. And I walk in North Omaha with no problems. I see old clients that will speak. It's all about treating people the way you want to be treated and being honest. But that's not something that a lot of caseworkers are willing to do. But I committed to it because I have 2 children that this is our community. At any given day, my kid can be invited to a birthday party, and one of the kids who was an ex-client of mine could be there. It's just that saturated. But because we've become so distant and far removed, caseworkers, especially caseworkers of color, tend to try to migrate over to non-colored communities. And it doesn't help our children, because I did try it as a social experiment. I sent my son to Creighton Prep and my daughter to St. Bernard. And my son, always been an overachiever, stayed on the honor roll, even at Creighton Prep, but he was miserable. He was depressed, even though he was an overachiever. Being surrounded by those people just because he was academically the same as the children that were wealthy there, it just didn't fit his culture. It didn't fit his environment. Uh, that was one of the first times I had to explain to him that in order to be great, you have to learn how to be the minority in a lot of situations and be comfortable being that minority. So when I look at it from a social worker standpoint, I love my community. I love my people. I get a kick out of going anywhere and just watching things, because I find things funny that people don't find things funny. That's just who I am. But I also learned that transparency is important. Just because I have an important role doesn't mean I forget where I came.
We're at the very end, and I always like to give my the guests a chance for closing comments. Do you have any closing comments for our viewing audience on this program, which we titled "Conversational Race and Anti-Racism Challenges"?
Yeah. As far as child welfare is concerned, it's not a secret. If you're African American and you have a question about something going on in your child welfare case or something going on in your family, Life Changes is available, more is available. Reach out and ask questions, because a lot of times, a lot of the injustices that occur are because no one asked questions, no one understood. I think that when I think of child welfare, I've accepted the fact somewhere, somehow, I'm going to always be a child welfare worker, somehow. But understand that child welfare worker does not mean you're working with a child, you're working with the parent. And that's where I think the misconception comes in. Be able to tolerate adults if you want to be a child welfare worker, because that's one of the biggest things. But I also feel like, again, like I'm working really hard for Life Changes to be that village to where you can go somewhere when your family's in crisis and get the skills or get the support you need so that child welfare can get out of our community so we can go back to raising our families the way we used to.
Yeah. Well, Brea, appreciate you being on the show today, and hopefully we'll do much more of these in-depth interviews and conversations to help raise the awareness about anti-racism and race equity in this divided city. So really thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this edition. Join us again next time for another edition of a program, Morocco.